So, hello everyone. My name's Torange Khonsari, and so welcome to the Bedtime Stories. And I'd like to thank the Architecture Foundation for this invitation, most of all because I could actually blow dry my hair in isolation, first time a long time. So I'm reading a few small extracts from a book, this one by it's mirrored, Think Like a Commoner, by David Bollier. And I decided to read this because in kind of the last couple of decades of practicing and teaching in architecture, in a way I've been quite critical of my own profession of architecture, both as a female, a little bit as a kind of non-white architect, and and in a way, although a lot of the stuff that I've been critiquing isn't also really specifically to do with my ethnicity or gender, and I think it is kind of shared more across the profession by so many people that I've talked about. And some of those issues were really the decline of the agency of the architect. Kind of what I found was a lack of innovation and creativity in practice, lack of kind of quite broad applied ethics and cooperation between us as architects and the social structures that we practice in, and really uncomfortable hierarchical power structures within construction, and also this kind of what I think a lack of critical engagement with the objects. And I don't mean that in a formal sense, I mean that in a social, political, economic sense within a kind of extractive neoliberal context. And I didn't want to feel like that, and I didn't want to leave the profession, and I wanted to find some kind of something that kind of would start to become some kind of solution. And the commons, which are still emerging and are coined as a frontier to how we may produce different worlds and cultures, as a post-capitalist solution kind of presented itself when I was invited, or Public Works were invited to the European Commons Assembly at the European Parliament in Brussels, and there I realized that actually it's not just a theoretical thing, it's not just tiny little bits here and there, but actually there is a whole, some people call it movement behind it. I was getting more and more tired about these kind of dogmas and this kind of political positions between dogmatic left or right, and what the commons pose in a way is not those kind of camps, which I find quite problematic. And also, as I started to do more and more research, I decided that to reframe architecture and to support efficacy than extraction, it's kind of good to put courses out there, which is what the masters that I teach now at London Met is on cultural commons, which is more interdisciplinary and starts to address the commons within the city. So without talking so much more, I'm going to read these different bits from the book, and I hope you enjoy it. So here we go. I want you, my reader, to imagine that you are my quizzical seatmate as we begin a short flight. You have intuitions about the commons and the need for social cooperation. You surely know about the dismal performance of corporate capitalism and government. You may even be concerned about the alarming privatization of countless public resources, the proliferation of ads in every nook of everyday life, and the growing list of stubborn environmental problems. For my part, I have many stories to tell about the power of commons to address such problems in innovative, socially minded ways. After researching and writing about countless enclosures of commons in which corporate interests appropriate our shared wealth and turn it into expensive private commodities, I have learned how dangerous our ignorance of the commons is. It simply enables the private plunder of our common wealth, as the subtitle of my book on the common silent theft put it. We have so few words to name the pathologies of markets and feasible commons-based alternatives. I like to think that by naming the commons, we can learn about how to reclaim them. We can begin to gain a healthy perspective on the limits of the markets and learn how to participate in acts of commoning with others. And we can reap many benefits: economic, social, political, civic, physical, aesthetic, even spiritual, that simply can't be bought in a shop. The many misconceptions that surround the commons bother me. So I want to explain why the history of commons and the political visions it sets forth are cause for optimism. I want to explain how the commons can ameliorate our economic troubles by advancing a richer theory of values than conventional economics. This is not just an idle academic concern, but an urgent practical one, because too much of the world's economic and political life revolves around voracious markets and the ecological damage and warped human relationships they engender. Countless real-life commons for natural resources, online information, civic life provide a vital counterpoint. These commons integrate economic production, social cooperation, personal participation, and ethical idealism into a single package. They represent a practical paradigm of self-help and collective gain. The commons is essentially a parallel economy and social order that quietly but confidently affirms that another world is possible, and more, we can build it ourselves, and we can build it now. As we will see in the following pages, the commons hold great promise for reinventing dysfunctional institutions and reforming predatory markets. It can help us rein in our overly commercialized consumer culture. It can usher in new forms of green governance to protect the environment. At a time when our representative democracy has become a gaudy charade driven by big money and remote bureaucracies, the Commons offers a new form of on-the-ground participation and responsibility that can make a real difference in people's lives. As a paradigm, the Commons consists of working, evolving models of self-provisioning and stewardship that combine the economic and the social, the collective, and the personal. The markets and state, once very separate realms of morality and politics, are now joined at the hip, a tight alliance with a shared vision of technological progress, corporate dominance, and ever-expanding economic growth and consumption. Commoners realize that this is not just a morally deficient, spiritually unsatisfying vision for humanity, it is a mad utopian fantasy. It is also ecologically unsustainable, a crumbling idyll that can no longer command the respect it once took for granted. In response, the Commons sets forth a very different vision of human fulfillment and ethics, and invites people to achieve their own bottom-up, do-it-yourself style of emancipation. It has little interest in hidebound party politics, rigid ideologies, or remote centralized institutions. It seeks to build a new, or as Buckminster Fuller memorably put it, To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. That's what a robust commons movement around the world is doing. It is pioneering new forms of production, more open and accountable forms of governance, innovative technologies and cultures, and healthy, appealing ways to live. It is a quiet revolution, self-organized, diversified, and socially minded. It is pragmatic yet idealistic, and for now only occasionally engaged in mainstream politics or public policy. Yet, it has been steadily growing, in most instances outside the gaze of the mainstream media and political establishment. It seems poised to go wide, as they say in the movie business, because the various tribes of transnational commoners are starting to find each other. They are coordinating their work and thinking and developing ways to make common cause in the face of growing dysfunctionalities and anti-democratic paranoia of market state. No survey of the commons would be complete without an overview of the varieties of enclosures now dispossessing communities and degrading the environment and culture. Diverse realms of our commonwealth, water, land, forests, fisheries, biodiversity, creative works, information, public spaces, indigenous cultures are all under siege. The encouraging news is that despite rampant market enclosures, commoners are responding with a remarkable range of hardy, innovative models. Enclosures is a process by which corporations pluck valuable resources from their natural context, often with government support and sanction, and declare that they be valued through market prices. The point is to convert resources that are shared and used by many to ones that are privately owned by individuals and controlled and treated as tradable commodities. So to talk about enclosure then is a way to point to the commons and reframe the discussion. The language of enclosure makes visible the antisocial, anti-environmental effects of the free market and validates commoning as an appropriate, often effective alternative. So how would our cities look like if we reframed the discussion? The city is one of the most fiercely contested arenas for the market enclosures. Public squares, parks, walkways, sports arenas, and the very face and identity of a city are being taken over by a cozy alliance of corporations, politicians, developers, and professional architects and planners. Development and progress are the watchwords, or perhaps more accurately, PR code words for the supremacy of corporate needs and market growth over all else. Polska Grupa, a group of architects and urban planners from Pula, Croatia, put it in this way in their communal urbanism social charter. We imagine city as a collective space which belongs to all those who live in it, who have the right to find there the conditions for their political, social, economic, and ecological fulfillment at the same time, assuming duties of solidarity. This concept of the city is blocked by capitalist dialectic based on difference in public and private good. From these two poles, state and market emerge as the only two subjects. State and market emerge as the only two subjects. We want to escape this dialectic, not to focus on eventually third subject, but on the group of collective subjectivities and the commons that they produce. Polska Grupa uses the language of the commons to help reassert a moral entitlement to public spaces. Such language helps claim the right to access and use public spaces and create new spaces with one's own tools and imagination, especially in the face of bureaucratic systems that ignore basic human rights and social needs. So that's also the goal of many right to the city movements around the world that are striving to reclaim cities whose design and operation have been captured by developers, industry, and the elite. So it was no accident that following Franco's death in Spain, the city of Barcelona created all sorts of new public squares. These spaces are crucial to the ability of citizens to express themselves as collective, express themselves as collective in public, and to challenge government abuse of power. The enclosure of public spaces is essentially an anti-democratic act. When shopping malls supplant our public squares and corporate brands seize control of our parks and our promenades, we lose our capacity to see each other as people, and we become brands and carriers of economic value. We can't socialize and speak publicly, and it becomes harder for individuals to identify and empathize with each other. The erosion of public space means that it is much harder to be commoners. Without these spaces, we are forced into playing roles dictated by the market and the state, acquisitive consumer and quiescent obedient citizen. So I don't really know if that's half an hour, but I think it's probably enough to for this bedtime story. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope that you don't think, oh, thanks, I can't sleep now with all that, because there is a lot of hope in the Commons. There's a lot of architectural practices who are doing this globally. So if you're interested, then do go and research it and do go and find out about them, and sleep tight. Thanks, everybody.